Welcome to the Fifth Trooper Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fifth Trooper Podcast, Season 3. This is a beginner's guide to Star Wars Legion. Thanks for joining us again. Real quick, before we move into the episode, I'd like to remind you that if you want to hear more about Star Wars Legion and kind of get some of our unfiltered thoughts, you can join us on patreon.com/thefifthtrooper. For any Patreon subscriber level, you'll be able to listen to the Fifth Trooper After Dark podcast. Plus, we give away quarterly rewards and yearly rewards for all of our members. So check it out, patreon.com/thefifthtrooper. Now, let's get into what we're going to talk about on this episode. I'm really excited. This is an episode about terrain and setting up your table. And, you know, there's so many ways you can approach this. Whether you're a hobby enthusiast or even if you don't have any experience or want to do hobby, there's plenty of 3D printable files that you can buy and you know, fully built terrain that you can buy from companies, or you can scratch build. You know, that's the fun thing about tabletop wargaming, is that a lot of it allows for each individual to be individual, really. And so if you want to build your own from scratch, like I do sometimes, you could do that. If you want to buy pre-built kits, you can do that as well. The other thing is, if you didn't know, little shameless plug here for the Fifth Trooper, we sell gaming mats. So we have 6x4 mats for a table, and then we also sell sidebars for Legion, which is where you hold your cards and stuff. Because when you set up a table, in Star Wars Legion, the battlefield is 6 foot by 3 foot, and most people and most other war games are 6 foot by 4 foot games, and so you're going to have a foot, you know, on the long side that you need to cut off there. And so what we did was we put together these 6-inch sidebars, red and blue, so you can choose your sides and kind of use them to keep your cards organized and show the true battlefield. The other thing that's neat about Star Wars Legion is Star Wars. There's so many planets, both discovered and undiscovered in the canon, that we could use that really you can't go wrong. So you could potentially use some old fantasy stuff that maybe you're an old wargamer from the Warhammer fantasy days. You could use some of that stuff in Star Wars, and just, you know, it's a planet that hasn't made it to the technology age yet, maybe. You know, you can use just plain forests, right? That's all Endor is it's just a forest. Deserts, we have multiple desert planets, and with the advent of Mandalorian, you know, going to all these other newer planets as well as revisiting some of the old planets, it gives us a lot of opportunity for artistic expression in our tables. I'm going to write a companion piece to this that talks about setting up your table, and a lot of that comes from the community over at Legion Tournament Circuit. They are kind of the de facto tournament, let's call them organizers and information hub, and you can check them out at legiontournamentcircuit.com and see some of that. But I'm gonna kind of talk about that on the blog, how to set up the table, what you should be mindful of, and what kind of terrain you should use. In the meantime, we're about to have Jason and Rob on from legionterrain.com. These guys are awesome. They do a ton of terrain, and it's all very Star Wars themed. So again, if you're one of those people who just wants a table and doesn't want to do the hobby aspect, you could go check them out. And before we get to their interview, they're actually going to be doing a 10% off for our listeners. If you use the code OLD4ARMS, that's OLD, the number 4, ARMS, that's 10% off. That's OLD4ARMS. And this is on individual items. So later in the episode, you're going to hear us talk about downed X-Wings or downed TIE Fighters. This code would work for those. Now, this doesn't stack if you end up buying a full table, but you can buy individual items with this code for 10% off, and it's going to be good till March 31st. So go to legionterrain.com, put in the code OLD4ARMS, that's OLD, the number 4, ARMS, and you'll get 10% off on an individual item. So the other neat thing about Legion Terrain, guys, is we built a table together. We designed the mat over here at the Fifth Trooper, and they designed all the terrain, the Dark Temple. We'll play off of Exegol or like a Sith Temple. And so you can also check that out on both of our websites. Okay, and without further ado, let's go to the conversation I had with Jason Robb over at legionterrain.com about terrain and tables. All right, and I am joined here with Rob and Jason from legionterrain.com. How are you guys?
Fantastic.
Great. And so I kind of led into this podcast talking about terrain and how people should set up tables and, how much terrain they need, like 25% to 35% of the table should be terrain. And I thought it would be really nice to have you guys on and kind of, since you're building terrain on the regular for tables. And, we've teamed up on a table recently, the Dark Temple table, and I did the mat and you guys did the terrain. I thought it'd be good to have you guys on and kind of walk through the process of how you design the terrain and design the board when you're building it.
Okay.
So I'll let you guys, go ahead.
Well, I think, to start out with, one thing that we try to do is design at least a half table as we're building out terrain. So we want to kind of encapsulate a little world, whether just in case somebody's out there playing the skirmish rules. And then as we go through our process of designing the 3D printed terrain, we would then expand that to a second half and maybe build out the whole board like we did, with the Dark Temple board that you mentioned. And so that process really goes back to, because we're very focused in the Legion space. We know our stuff kind of can port to some other games as well, but our world is focused in Legion, so we try to stay on top of the rules. Jason and I spend most of our time painting terrain for people and getting it out the door for people and designing it. So we don't get to play as often as we want, but we do play. And so what we do is try to take those experiences and make sure that we're going to design something that makes good sense from a rules perspective. So we want to take into account all the rules in Star Wars Legion that, and this would be true for any game, right? Whether you're playing Legion or D&D, the rules that use terrain. So in Legion, those are going to be things like scale and expert climber. If you're using Wookiees or old forearms. But I'm
just gonna leave that there. Just old forearms.
He's definitely one of my favorite models. But I tend to be more of a rebel player. So, but I did enjoy painting that guy. But so we want to take into account things that will let you use stuff like jump. Whether it's Luke or Boba Fett and Sabine, and because of that, we like to have a mixed layer of terrain so that all gameplay doesn't necessarily happen on the surface of the mat or the table. We'd love to have in each of our boards that we build at least a second level, possibly a height 1, maybe even a height 2 scenario. So that's big for us. And looking at the other rules that are in Legion that are terrain related, whether it's unhindered, right? It's kind of difficult to design and print impeding terrain. It's how do you print something that's just hard to walk through? So we try to we're trying to come up with something that'll fill that space. But
well, and I would say just as an example, a couple years ago now, we had the Northeast Open, our Legion tournament, and you guys provided a couple tables worth of terrain, and you had that one industrial one that kind of had that green sludge, that kind. That was that we actually treated that as difficult terrain because it was cool. Like, you get stuck in some toxic waste as you're walking through. Yeah.
Unless you're a Wookiee, right?
Yeah, right.
And that's one of the big things that, that Rob's saying is we love playing it when we play it, and we just know what we want to have, and we want to test the rules and, make it not just kind of the empire with this one setup always wins, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to look for ways to kind of, make it challenging for certain pieces to go so that when you go to a tournament or something, there'll be 5 or 6 different types of boards. We've been to some tournaments to where, we walked in and we were listening to people and they would see a board and they'd be like, oh no, I'm going to die. This is the worst possible terrain. And it's like, then make your whole army a little more robust. Don't go for a one-trick pony. And so when we're designing, there's times that we'll look at it and we'll go, this could use more line of sight blocking terrain, let's say.
Yeah.
But maybe that's okay right now. Maybe that's another different test that we can kind of put armies through, so that you in a tournament or something like that, you get a little bit more test on different boards. And so that's why we try to make our stuff really configurable, to where you could just try to, you could set it up this way and set it up that way. And ultimately you get those different tests that you would get in a tournament.
Yeah. And I would say, for people who are going to build their tables at home, that's a great piece of advice. And that's, even when I'm designing my own tables here and building stuff, doing the hobbyist side, it's like making sure that I can move these pieces around and maybe they're a little bit more modular than I would want them to be, from like a whole like artistic approach, right? Because you never know what the next, like we just got the announcement of 2 new vehicles just recently, right? And it's like, God knows how those are going to function on the table. And so we got to be prepared for that.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes down to, okay, how could we slow this thing there? How could we do that? And by having it, kind of configurable, like we were talking about, you're building your first board, and say, hey, I just spent a gob of money on this core set. I'd like to have some of these cool pieces that these people sell, but I'm broke for a little while.
Yeah.
Go get some Pringles cans. Like Rob always says, he says, hey, just go to the recycle bin, and a can of spray paint, and you're going to have some awesome terrain. And like you said, instead of making one big, huge piece, my older brother kind of taught me and Robert how to kind of paint and make terrain and stuff. And he would get these huge pieces of styrofoam and just turn them into this awesome piece. But like you're saying, if you get this big, huge monstrosity on the board, it really limits what you can do with it. Yeah. Whereas you have several smaller pieces that you could put together or spread apart, makes it a whole lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And so let me ask you guys this question. This wasn't on our list that I gave you, but I'm going to ask you, how has it been with all the new tanks and vehicles? How has that kind of affected your design philosophy when it comes to the tables that you're putting together now?
I think, in some of our newer tables, like the Dark Temple one, we tend to be a little more sparse, right? We used to have lots of small objects all over the place, and these big vehicles are just so big, and they just can't navigate through these little tunnels and things that have, been designed in some terrain. And so we try to, make sure that we keep it sparse enough that, there's room to add more. Obviously, we're in the business of selling this stuff. We sell a set and we sell the optional pieces, right? So people can throw more in and take some away if they don't need it, if they are playing with the big stuff. But I really wonder with this new flying vehicle, right? What that's going to do to some of our boards, like our tower board that has walkways that connect in between things, and how's that going to impact play with those pieces. So we're just a little more sparse, but we have the expansions available and stuff.
Yeah. So go ahead, Jason.
I was going to follow up with, as far as the way that we actually, we first start designing a new board, it is, okay, what would be cool? What would look awesome? And so we go in and we say, hey, we want this type of board. And we, like when we were talking about the temple board, the Dark Temple board, we're like, oh, it needs to look like this and this. And we put all kinds of things in and way overdo it. It's like this is no way this would ever work for a board. But then we take the pieces off until it looks balanced. And that's where there's lots of, like you said, about the 25% of your board should be terrain. And then there's, do you want a lot of line of sight blocking? Maybe, people said like from a third up to 2/3 of it could be that. that sort of thing. And so, it's kind of start with a lot and then pull off. And that's a quick way to get to a piece of a big board that you like looking at, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's a great philosophy, is kind of because you can always just put the terrain to the side, right, on your shelf while you're playing. Right. And so always over design terrain, because there's nothing worse than not having enough.
Right. Right. And that's when you pull out the stapler and put it out,
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I think one other guide that I would give to someone who's getting started, besides, raid your recycling, is invest in a little bit of thematic scatter. The stuff that's, honestly, whether it's a chemical barrel or a little evaporator tank or whatever, something that looks like it belongs in the universe, and that can turn it sort of makes the world look lived in, right? So as you build it out, you're not just looking at large chunky objects there, but those smaller little things that usually are a lot less expensive to build, create, or buy, those can be a flavor adder to your board.
Yeah, it adds a spice to it.
I'll plug this for you guys. Is one of the great things that you guys have are those like downed X-Wing, down TIE Fighter, down AT-AT. And early on, when we first got into Legion and we first started the podcast, I have that hobby side, so I'm always building tables and doing different, terrain work. But one of the first things I bought was from you guys. I bought the down TIE Fighter, X-Wing, and the AT-AT, because you're absolutely right. I had all this old like Warhammer Fantasy terrain, which was okay. Yeah, you're on like a weird grass planet, but then you're like, oh, there's an X-Wing and TIE Fighter. Well, now it's Star Wars.
It's a Star Wars grass planet.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, talking about, especially those two pieces is, that's a great example. Some people always say, why do you always build everything crashed? Why don't you build the whole piece? And some of it has to do with more licensing and, staying out of the vision of people,
Yeah.
But a good bit of it is really more on playability.
Yeah.
Instead of having, just hugely tall, like we've been seen some boards where you get those big trees and they're like 2 feet tall, and it's like, wow. I mean, it looks cool from afar, but playing it, trying to dodge these 2-foot trees is kind of a nightmare. And so with these crash things, it's just the right amount of cover for, it's for guys to hide behind and shoot, and it supplies cover, not a lot of line of sight blocking, but and that's where finding things that are not just big chunks, like Robert said, the Rebel fighter and the Imperial fighter are great because they play as a good thematic piece, but they also provide good cover without taking up the whole freaking board.
Well, and even that AT-AT, right? It's big, but you can also piece it out and be like, oh, well, maybe the legs aren't there, or maybe it's just the legs, and so. Yeah, I really, I've always appreciated the way you guys look at tables and that modularity. And there's just so many options. Like those 2 tables we had Northeast Open were just really nice, because I think we even changed them from day 1 to day 2, just because they were so modular that we could make a different decision for the second day of the tournament. And I think that's something to remember at home too. That kind of translates for home play. So if you're not really going to tournaments, but you just want to play at home, being able to swap out your board every time you play will kind of add a lot of freshness to the games, and you won't. There's nothing worse than playing on the same board like 5 times in a row, and you're like, all right, I've had enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But okay, so let me ask you guys this. Rob, I'm going to have you go first. For you, what makes a really great piece of terrain?
Oh man, for me, in my heart, it's theme. Theme and greebles. That's what I'm going to say.
You and greebles, man. He loves those things.
Being the
explain greebles. Explain greebles to our listeners.
Greebles are essentially the small little things that you add. So we go back to our Pringles can, right? If you spray paint your Pringles can, everybody's going to know it's a Pringles can. But if you actually attach a small straw to the outside and spray paint that too, that's a greeble. Just a small item that's been attached to the outside of something that makes it look like more than it is. You can design a crate really easy in any child's 3D design software online. But if it's just a cube, you could have just, it's just a cube. So you got to put stuff on it, right, to make it look real. I think those are my big two. I love the thematic nature. Well, I saw Star Wars in the theater, the first movie. It was just called Star Wars: A New Hope when I was like 7 or 8. So, like for me, this is like part of my life. So I love this universe. I love this world. And Jason's the same way. And, just being able to see it there, those are probably in my heart. Now, in my mind, if I'm playing the game, it's going to be more like, is it configurable? And is there a place my troops can stand on it? Because I really like putting my troops on top of stuff. Those are I really do.
I couldn't tell by all your design choices. So, all right, Jason, what about you? What makes a really great piece of terrain?
I guess it's really going to go pretty much with what Robert said, which is does it tell a story? I mean, to me, when my side, when I'm dreaming up this stuff, right? Robert and I will have our design meetings, and it's the fun ones where you get to dream up new stuff and what's it going to look like. And in my head, every piece tells a story. There's a reason that little evaporator tank's right there. There's a reason this is over here. And if I can tell a story with the terrain, it changes everything to me, because yes, you've got to, I'll lay it out with making the story make sense. And then you've got to take some off and make it a little bit more playable. But it makes the flavor go way up. I enjoy playing that game a lot more. When I'm taking, I do the photography for us, and, I love setting those boards up just to get some action shots, because I get to tell a story. What happened? Did somebody storm in and took over this building and whatever? And so it really is, try to tell a story. Like I said, get the Pringles can, but put a tower here and cut one in half and put it over here and whatever. But try to say this is, a small section of Coruscant, and this is what happened this day. Somebody came in and tried to take over this one building, and these other guys came back and fought back. And if you can set it up like that, I really think that it just adds a lot of flavor, and it really lends to, I guess, making it a little faster. Instead of just setting stuff down and worrying about if everything's right, it just kind of balances and looks right. So my big thing is I love the terrain pieces that tell a story. That's what I like doing.
So you guys have thrown out a few tips here for some hobbyists at home. Jason, I'll start with you. Do you have any other tips? Something that people could do at home tonight, maybe, if they're listening to this podcast, they get home and they could do something at home. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I will leave this, a good bit of this to Robert, because he is a wizard when it comes to this. But I used to, when I was in college, I actually made 40K terrain out of foam core board, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And if you're looking just to make some quick stuff, find these old styrofoam pieces that your printer just came in, and use them, and you can, cut them up and paint them and make them look good. You can, go and get this foam core, and you can get a little X-Acto knife and cut up buildings and make little buildings like, nobody's business really fast. Yep. And, I guess that's my thing, is really the recycle bin is fantastic place. That foam core board, and then that blue foam at, and I guess pink foam too at Home Depot and Lowe's. Yep. I mean, that stuff just is, I mean, that's God's gift to, craft, terrain makers, because you can just make anything.
Yeah. And they're all like, I don't know about down there, but up here, they've been just selling the like 2 foot by 2 foot hobby boards now. Right. So you could just go like $4, I think, and you can buy a bunch of them and bring them, and you don't have to have like a special garage to store them in. You can just put them on your table.
Right. Yeah. And I guess the last thing I would say, and then let Robert take this one. He's got so many, expert things. It's not even funny, but is make it storable. Yeah. If you can kind of get some things that stack inside of each other. And that's, I mean, we'll discuss a piece, we'll finally come up with it, and then it's kind of to Robert, how's it going to fit together? And his big thing is, will it stack? right? And if you look at that temple that we just counted, dark temple, all of it will stack inside of each other and take up a very small footprint on your shelf, right?
Yep.
And so that's another thing to think about is, man, if I keep making this stuff, my goodness, I can't make it, I can't store it everywhere. And so if you can make it where it fits inside each other, it's kind of neat. Other than that, I will turn it to Rob because he's the master at this stuff.
All right, so Jason covered a whole lot of ground there. The pink foam, blue foam stuff, I don't know what it's insulating foam sheets.
Yeah.
You can get it in 1/2 inch, inch, and even 2 inch. And if you're really lucky out there, they do make a 4-inch stack, but it's pricey to get. So you can glue that stuff together. I've found that the glue that works the best is actually a paint. It's a paint called Gripper. And you kind of scuff up the pieces a little bit and you paint a little bit of that gripper between them, and that stuff dries like a boss in between that foam. That's the issue when you smack 2 pieces of foam together, is you create a vapor block, and essentially that's what it's there for. So whatever's in it won't dry, but that paint stuff really dries well without dissolving the foam or causing any problems like that. So that's a really good, if you can find that gripper paint, I think Glidden makes it. That's really good. And there's another, if you can make it to the hardware store after you listen to this, if you can get there before they close, there is a magic tube of stuff for making terrain, and it is called Acrylic Latex Caulk. They sell it in different, durabilities, like 5-minute dry time, 10-minute dry time. Get the 25-minute dry time stuff. It gives you a little bit more work time with it. But essentially, it's like this putty that you can spread on things, and it creates a tacky layer that you can use to make it where your miniatures won't slip as they climb up a slope. You can put sand on it after you've put it on your terrain. And it's really good for if you say you do buy a 3D printed, unpainted miniature, or not miniature, but a piece of terrain, a building from someone, and you're like, this looks pretty cool, but I wish it was more cracky. I wish I had more stuff on the outside, more stucco look. This stuff, you put on some gloves, or those cheap plastic bags from the garbage. Yeah, that's where I get my food. The grocery store. Those plastic bags from the grocery. You smear some of that on those bags and started attaching it to your terrain, or even to a piece of board, and you can make anything look like terrain. It's pretty cool stuff, and it's like $1.50 for a tube of it. So that's us magical. It goes by the name of Alex in most stores. ALEX, acrylic latex caulk. Got to get some of that.
All right. So as we're winding up here, I figured I'd ask you guys, and Jason, I'll let you go first on this one. What has been your favorite, I'm going to say entire table of terrain that you guys have put out so far? What's been your favorite one to work on, or just your favorite one to play on?
That's there are several that compete. Thematic wise, it would have to be with the Walker and all the crash ships and stuff, because it just exactly what you're looking at. Yeah. But my favorite one that we've played on that because it really opened up the game, was our tower board, where we've got the walkways in between, at different levels. It's kind of got the tractor beam sitting on it. There's this guy, one of our big customers, Rich, if he's listening, down he is in, I think, Mississippi. And he has taken some pictures. He has bought everything we've ever made pretty much. This tower board was amazing. It just looked like you knew it was Star Wars. It looked fantastic. The strategy went exponential. It's kind of like, I guess, chess to 3D chess or whatever. And it was just fantastic because of the different levels, because you can run around, because you get sniper places, because you can jump back up and do all those things. I think it adds another level of play, no pun intended. And it, just the flavor of it's really Star Wars.
All right. Rob?
I think if I'm going to have a friend over and teach them to play Legion, and honestly, that's my favorite thing to do, is to teach people to play, because I'm not a particularly good gamer. I love games with all my heart, but my brain just can't do it. I can remember the rules, but when it comes to strategy, I just fall apart. But if I'm going to get a table out and put it out in front of somebody, I start with like our Desert Village stuff, because it feels super Star Warsy, there in the first few minutes of whether it's the prequels or the original trilogy, you find yourself on these planets. It feels like the Mandalorian, that one that immerses people in the theme, and they're there.
Yep.
But I have to tell you, man, that Dark Temple specifically, and I'm looking at our website, it's the Ancient Dark Temple A set sitting on your mat, your Dark Temple mat. And that temple that we designed, like Jason said, it's really stackable, but the big thing about it is it's configurable. And I actually didn't design it that way originally, but kind of, for one thing, the necessity of it had to fit on a 3D printer, so it had to be taken apart. And as I took it apart, I realized, wait a minute, these pieces can make other pieces. So in that one Ancient Dark Temple, the central piece in that set, you can reconfigure it like it without trying 3 different ways. But if you kind of start going, wait, what if I did this? What if I put these over here? I just sat and did that one night, like almost playing a game. And I think I stopped at like 9 or 10 different ways that I could reconfigure and reuse that one piece.
Yeah.
So that one is emotionally a very satisfying piece for me. That's one I really like.
All right, so I'm going to give you my vote. Not that you guys asked, but I'm going to give it to you. So I've played and seen some of the Imperial Outpost. I've played and seen some of the Industrial Refinery, but by far my favorite, and I know I should pick Ancient Dark Temple because of our mat, but I'm not. It's the Renaissance City, which we also have a mat. We also have a mat for it, so I can plug myself there as well. But I love that. Like, so I got that table from you guys. It's by far one of my favorites. By far,
cool.
I love the interconnecting of all the columns and stuff. Holy crap.
The railing.
The railing. Oh my God. That was so genius. I love that whole set. Love it.
Yeah. That was a piece that as we designed it, we thought we're never going to print anything else. People are just going to buy these rails. That's all that we're ever going to, that's all that we're ever going to sell.
Yeah.
Because, they'll go on our board. They go on other folks' boards that are in that same thematic thing. I'm going to tell you a secret, but I'm not going to give you the answer. It's very hidden. There is an Easter egg on one of the pieces in that board, and I think it's on the Chichio building, the largest building. There's an Easter egg on that building, and no one's ever noticed it before. But it's not easy to see. It's concealed, but and you have to know a little bit about Jason and myself to really pick it apart.
Well, now I'm gonna go tear my shelf of terrain apart. I'll call you guys tonight at like midnight, crying. Just tell me.
You're so cruel.
But yeah, thank you so much for joining me, and for all of you listening, I highly encourage you to go check out legiontrain.com. And again, thank you guys for joining. This was great.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Welcome. Thanks.
Join us next week for another edition of the Fifth Trooper Podcast.
This has been a Fifth Trooper production.